Hello, scruftards, degenerate, random internet weirdos, and people stuck in mom's basement for far too long, and all you despicable vatniks. Welcome to the War Zone. I'm Scruffy, and this is Scruffy Tales. And it's the 17th of January 2025, and I figured why not make a frontline update. We're going to take a look at Kursk, where we may have Ukrainian advances. Ukraine may actually be pushing Russia back slightly in Kursk. We'll also take a look at the Kupiansk, where Russia has successfully crossed the Oskil River, threatening Kupiansk from the north. Uh, Russia appears to have secured the entirety of Toretsk, more or less. And we will also take a look at Pokrovsk, where Russia is making important gains to the west of the city of Pokrovsk. So as you can see on the image to the left here, we have a claim made by Reporting from Ukraine, a YouTube channel, where they state that Ukraine in this area here has made a counter move and forced the Russians and North Koreans back, presumably because as the Russians and North Koreans pushed in, they took so heavy casualties, it allowed the Ukrainians to push them back and follow them and reclaim territory. Beyond that, things appear to be pretty static here in Kursk at the moment. But if we zoom in a bit, it is this area here where the Russians and North Koreans tried to push in down this valley, and also along the windbreaks and valleys over here. And now the claim is it's not showing on Deep State or ISW, Mayakovsk 73 or ISW or whatever yet. But the claim is that Ukraine counterattacked in this area and managed to even push out all the way into these wooded areas here south of Kruglenkoe. Is there village? Is this the village? See, where is that a building? That I don't know. I know we have buildings down here. Is this the actual village of Kruglenkoe? I don't know, because I don't. Anyway, Kruglenkoe on the map is up here anyway, and the claim is that Ukraine has pushed back into this valley and even as far out as into these forested areas here. So, failed attempt by Russia and North Korea to push in. They took heavy losses, and Ukraine could then force them back and reclaim a large section of this valley here outside of Kruglenkoe. Important if it's true, because that forces the Russians away from this bridge right here. Bridge down here, that was blown up a couple of months ago, but this bridge here is what the Russians are after, because that will give them access across the river to assault Malaya Lochnia itself. There's a river here that protects the larger town here. And if the Russians reach the river, they also somewhat isolate Pogrebki. In Pogrebki, we have a lot of fighting going on. I haven't updated my map here, I realized. But it appears as if Russia has pushed into this town. And there should be a church. I read it somewhere that the church in town here is probably... It appears to be where most of the fighting is happening around that church. Where could that church be? I don't know where it is. There's supposed to be a church here somewhere. Anyway, so Russia is pushing in from the north into Pogrebki. I believe they've taken this street here, and this should be the contested area. This square here between the streets, buildings, and woods. So Pogrebki is under assault from the north, and pressure is mounting on the Ukrainians here. But like I said, the claim is that Ukraine pushed back along this way and are in this patch of forest here. And here we have Mayakovsk 73 and his map. We just took a look at Kursk. We're now going to move in on Kupiansk. As you know, here's Kupiansk. Russia's been trying to come down this way. They have failed in every attempt. Managed to push up this way towards the Oskil River, trying to push southwest here. But as we all know, they also managed to cross the Oskil River up here. And since then, they have been pushing north and they have been pushing west. And here they have actually pushed quite heavily into the town of Dvorichna and the surrounding villages and neighborhoods. And they are now in control of these bridges here. If they are intact, I don't know. But as you can imagine, if they can get these bridges into working condition, you can then begin to ship across a lot of manpower, a lot of equipment, vehicles and what have you, to reinforce the positions in Dvorichna, or is it Rakova? I think the entire thing is Dvorichna, yeah. So, yeah, Russia is making gains. They are pushing in hard into this area here at Dvorichna, and they are... they've taken over something like 40% of the town, maybe. A bit concerning, to be fair. And they've also managed to push up from the low ground, up on the high ground. That's my dog. The poor thing has a cone on his head. And taken control of these woods, and even pushed out into these forest belts here, following a road. Or is it a railroad? No, I believe it's a road. Taking a farm or a factory area down here. They are on the outskirts of Zapadne. And it seems as if they are now maybe trying to come in north of Kupiansk. Instead of pushing through here, I mean, here you have urban areas, factories, probably a lot of heavy Ukrainian fortifications, and they're now trying to bypass it, coming down here where there probably are less amounts of fortifications. This should be an easier approach, and also it will force Ukraine to allocate huge resources, manpower, artillery, and what have you, to contain the Russians up here, and that could give the Russians a break down here in pushing in towards Kupiansk from the north. Of course, the Oskil River is in the way, so they still have to find a way across the river and the bridges here to reach Kupiansk, but still, it forces Ukraine to spread out their forces and their resources, and that could allow Russia to make a move here as well as coming down from the north, attacking Kupiansk in a pincer move, essentially. So a bit worrisome that Russia is having successes. They were for quite a few days, couple of weeks, stuck here on the riverbank between the high ground here and the river, but they have steadily been pushing north until they reached the town and pushed into the town, and then they moved up the hill here into these woods, and they are now right outside Zapadne. And it seems as if this river crossing is successful. They have established a foothold, and they are now expanding the control here. And crucially, they have moved in to control these bridges that may allow Russia to just ship on over everything they need to continue the assault here north of Kupiansk. And we're still with Mayakovsk 73 and his map. If we zoom in on Chasiv Yar, as we can see, Russia's pushed in, taking control of large sections of the town up here on the high ground. I mean, Ukraine is still holding on to a lot of territory here, obviously, but Russia is pushing in heavily so, and will secure the high ground. I believe Stupochki, I think, is a huge hill. So if they come down here and start grabbing territory, they will be in control of a lot of high ground in the area. But we'll see. The important thing to remember is that this is taking time. Russia is not just steamrolling, right? This has been ongoing for months and months and months. So Yes, Ukraine is being pushed back that much. I mean, you can't deny it, but it's not. They're not being overrun, right? Russia is not steamrolling through Ukrainian lines. This is taking forever for Russia to make any headway. So even if the Ukrainians are being forced back, they are putting up one hell of a fight, and Russia is suffering for it, and massively so. And we have the same thing down here at Toretsk. As we can see, Russia has more or less taken the entire city. You have some outskirts here that are still in Ukrainian control with a factory, some slag heaps, but essentially the city has fallen. But again, it has taken time. Ukraine was not, you know, steamrolled. They were not thrown out. They held their ground for an insane amount of time. And the same can be said for down here and at New York, and later on at Belivka and Leonidivka and what have you. Russia, yes, Russia made this big push, but I mean, since then they haven't really gotten anywhere. So it's taking time for Russia to make headway. Ukraine is able to hold the line and inflict massive amounts of casualties on the Russians in these urban areas. Now that Toretsk is about to fall, the question is, can Russia move out? As you can see when we zoom in, there's a lot of open territory here north of Toretsk. And I don't think the Russians want to try and cross here. They're going to lose a lot of vehicles moving across here. Maybe they will make an attempt for this factory. It's going to be difficult for Ukraine to supply this factory because of the open ground. Russian drones can hunt down logistics moving into the factory. So that kind of suggests that Russia might actually stand a decent chance of launching an assault since the factory is isolated. But I don't know. I think it feels like Russia will move into the woods here and then focus on this belt here of villages and towns, because this offers protection. It offers cover. Yes, the terrain here favors the defenders, but it also provides a lot of cover for the Russians, where they can hide in basements and they can take cover behind walls, brick walls and concrete walls and what have you. So I think Russia will come in this way through the forest and try and link up with their forces here, and then make this push north along this belt here of towns and villages, coming up towards Pleshivka eventually. We might even see an attempt to push up through here at Dachne and Dylivka, following the forest belt here, simply because it provides cover, right? This is where you can advance and hide. Out here, they will be hunted down by drones. Out here, they will be easy targets for artillery. But we'll see. Russia might try and bum rush the factory here with some vehicles. See how that goes. But the main push will probably come up along this string here of towns and villages going north towards Pleshivka eventually. So that would be Toretsk. Let's head on over to Pokrovsk. Right, so Pokrovsk and the surrounding area. I haven't really marked or mapped out the goings on to the south. You know me, I'm of the opinion this is inevitable. Ukraine can merely slow down Russia here. What is important is holding the line up here to the west of Pokrovsk. And damn it all, it seems as if Russia is pushing through. If we zoom in here, we saw Russia coming up this way through Shevchenko, Pishanev, Ovkove, made some moves towards Svirove, but the main push came here to the west, came up between Udachne and Kotlyne, and my hope was that Russia would be forced to move into Udachne, that the Ukrainian defenses here between Svirove and Kotlyne was forcing Russia west away from these vital supply lines that I marked with white dotted lines. But in the last couple of days, 48, 72 hours, we have seen Russia moving up and then shifting to a northeastern approach towards these vital supply lines. So what they did was they came up this way, and as you can see, you have wide open spaces, not suitable for an assault towards Kotlyne. So they came in through Vovkova and then followed the valleys here where you have trees and forests and lanes of woodlands, came up to the railroad here where you have even thicker forest belts, and then started slowly pushing into Kotlyne. They took this street right here where you have a lot of buildings, followed the forest belt along the railroad tracks here, came and they have now reached as far as being outside of this large factory. They haven't pushed into Kotlyne or the factory, they are still only in the forest belt, but they are clearly pushing northeast along the railroad tracks right towards this vital logistical hub. You can see here you have 1, 2, 3 logistical routes coming into town. You have 2 railroads as well, this one now being cut, but as you can see, this is an area Russia wants to control. 3 roads and 2 railroads enter Pokrovsk in this area. They have also pushed up north here into these windbreaks, as you can see, going northeast, and they can follow these paths all the way up to this vital area as well. So my worst worries are coming true. If you remember, I was worried that they would make this push and this push, hoping they would be pushed towards the Dutch instead. But here we are, both moving into this pocket here, going straight for the logistical hub, and also pushing into Kotlyne. If they grab Kotlyne, this will be a excellent forward base of operations for the Russians. A lot of places where they can hide, where they can store supplies, food, ammunition. They can treat wounded. Soldiers can rest in relative safety. And then they can push out and supply the fighting as they're moving along the railroad tracks to the logistical hub up here. So far, Ukraine is keeping them out of town, keeping them out of the factory. We'll see how long that lasts. Also here at Sverove, Russia has pushed into these initial buildings right on the outskirts of town. I was a bit hesitant that they would, but they were right next to them, so I guess it makes sense for them to just push into these buildings since they came up this way. Why not take a couple of buildings? We'll see if they keep pushing into town. This should be an area heavily defended by Ukraine, Sverove. Ukraine really should be able to keep the Russians outside of town. It should be a big ask for Russia to push in here while they are also pushing troops over here. Is my feeling. Ukraine should be able to keep Russia outside of Sverove unless Russia is committing a lot of manpower into these the fights going on here. Yeah, I mean, it's not looking good. I won't bullshit you. This is not good. Russia is pushing northeast at Kotlyne, between Sverove and Kotlyne, straight for this logistical hub. That said, Ukraine still has options. I mean, as you can see here, even if they cut these white lines, Ukraine can still bring in supplies from these roads here and cut across here and link up with this vital supply line from the north. So they can still bring in supplies this way. They can still bring in supplies this way, even if Russia pushes into this part of town. They have supplies coming in from the northeast as well through here into town, And even Russia hasn't reached this far yet, but this is the goal. Obviously, Russia is pushing up to this big intersection to cut the supply lines coming in from the east. That won't stop Ukraine because they can still receive, as you can see here, you have a supply line coming all the way from Kramatorsk. This way you can see it here to Toretsk, Shakov, and then into Pankivka, and then you can follow the roads and villages and towns down here all the way into Myrnorad, or you can swing westward and follow the road into Rudinsk and reach the main supply line from the north. So Ukraine still has options, even if Russia has cut this supply line, and even if they're now threatening the western supply lines. Ukraine can still bring in a lot of support, a lot of reinforcements and supplies from the north along various routes. But make no mistake about it, Russia will keep pushing here if they want to cut this supply line and this supply line. If that means they will go straight for it, or if they will try and push up to Volodymyrivka maybe. Ukraine can still work their way around going in north. It's going to be difficult for Russia to cut all supplies leading into these two cities, Myrnorad and Pokrovsk. That's what I'm getting at. As you can see, Russia needs to really push far and put in a lot of effort to properly surround these two cities. And it's taken them how long to reach this far? The question is, how long will it take them to keep pushing to come into the north and threaten these supply lines in the north here? Because remember, Ukraine only needs one active supply route to hold these cities. That is what we saw at Bakhmut. That is what the Russians did at Stalingrad. They had one tiny, not at all secure supply line at all. They had to cross a river and what have you to bring the supplies to the front. They were constantly under German bombardment, but they still managed to get equipment, troops, and resources through to hold the line in Stalingrad, and that turned that battle on its head and eventually the war. So the Russians are well aware of this, and so are the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians know what they did at Bakhmut with that one tiny supply line leading into Bakhmut. That was all they needed to cause 80,000 casualties to the Russians at Bakhmut. And the Russians, they know how they defeated the Germans in Stalingrad. They had one supply line into Stalingrad, and that was enough to turn that battle around. So the Russians, they really want to move in and cut these supply lines because they don't want Pokrovsk and Myrnorad to turn into a modern Stalingrad in 2025, where the Russians will be crushed and broken within the city limits. Likewise, the Ukrainians, they want to repeat Bakhmut by keeping as many supply lines open so that they can inflict horrendous casualties on the Russians. If they could inflict 80,000 casualties on the Russians at Bakhmut, imagine what they can do here at Pokrovsk and Myrnorad. We're talking 200,000, 300,000, 400,000 casualties potentially for the Russians trying to push in here. So Ukraine wants Russia to push in ahead of time, prematurely, right? The Russians, on the other hand, they really want to cut as many supply lines as possible, preferably everything, so that they can starve this city and then move in and grind the Ukrainian defenders down. So we'll see if the Russians are patient enough to push in and cut as many supply lines as possible, or if Ukraine can hold the line somewhere here to the west and here to the east, and that will force Russia to eventually launch an assault into these cities ahead of time, ahead of schedule, prematurely, when they are not ready. And that will potentially allow Ukraine to inflict devastating casualties on the Russian army within the city limits of Pokrovsk and Myrnorad. And that's it. Thank you for watching. I hope you found it interesting. I hope I'll see you in the next one. As always, go po marsh, Ukraine, and give them hell.